Hello, welcome to The Secret Mind. My name's Jules, and this is a little bit of a review of the Blackpool Magic Convention, Platinum Magic Convention 2023. I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to do it because there are good and bad things in it, and I don't like to say anything negative, but I've made a decision that I'm going to. I was just Googling and I saw a review from a chap on the Genie forum. I'm not a member of Genie, but I Googled it and it let me into this page, done by a chap called Craig Mitchell from last year's show. I don't know him. And he gave a really good, honest rundown. And I always appreciate honest feedback that isn't over-egged, overdressed, and too sucking up. So I thought I would do one of those. A few people watch my terrible video on the dealer's room. I'm not an expert videoer. I have an interest in magic. I've been to 3 Blackpool conventions. I've been to about 12 South Tyneside conventions. And there's a certain process if you're not necessarily used to going to these things. It takes a bit of, you've got to get your confidence in to walk to that room sometimes, and you walk into a big room like Blackpool, and it's not as straightforward. It's all, nobody knows you necessarily, and you may get more connected as you go along, but it's a bit of a step to take, and it's worth recognizing that, I think. So I thought I would give that perspective instead of just the professional's perspective, and just maybe a slightly different perspective. And I've seen enough things to know what I think is really good and what could be better. How was Blackpool overall? To my mind, not quite as good as last year, but it was good. It was worth the trip. I stayed for all 3 nights due to train delays on the Sunday. Meant it was very difficult to get out of Blackpool. I think it was impossible to get out of Blackpool using a train. So I stayed over to the Monday, which means I could use my full weekend ticket, including the third gala shows, which I'd never been to before. So that was nice, rather than rushing off. It takes time to get to the West Coast from where I am. So I'm going to talk about 10 good things, and I'm going to talk about some not so good things. I've only got 8 of them, I think. I'm not going to make them up to 10 for the sake of it. Then I've got a couple of ideas to share with you. Then we're out of here. All right. So this is the thing. A lot of Blackpool is about the demonstrators, the dealers in the magic. And these guys are tireless. I mean, they will perform their tricks for you. It's not easy for an audience member, if you've not been to one of these things, to ask them to perform a trick for you. You don't know what to ask. You don't know how much they're going to share with you. Are they going to just tell you the secret? Are you going to have to ask? Are you going to have to meet them halfway and indicate that you kind of know by using some Penn and Teller type code word so they know they are going to share more? Ultimately, they're selling this stuff. But people behave differently with different people, probably even with different age groups, and also depending on how much they're just so willing to share at that moment, and they hold a little bit back. You can understand that. But also you can end up buying a product, and of course the sooner they sell it, the better to you. But you can end up buying a product before you fully understand it. And if you go back repeatedly asking for more explanation, or if you're missing anything, then it becomes embarrassing, both to you and probably to them, thinking, oh, well, I've seen this person 3 times, why haven't I got a sale or something? So it's a complicated dynamic, and it can put people off. Having said that, some of these guys were tireless and brilliant and very sharing. If you walk past with a video camera, some people will go like this, and some people will give you a funny look. So, and that's even when you're being careful not to include as many, other people's faces on there. It's impossible in a room with thousands of people in it. But yeah, so you can certainly make a better video than I did by asking permissions, but it's not. I don't think it's easy to go in at a quiet time because it was packed all the time. But they're tireless. So just to show what a great job they did, and to see something live is an amazing thing, and it makes you want to hand your money over. But knowing what questions to ask so that you won't waste your money and think in advance, will I use this, isn't so easy. That's your problem, my problem, our problem. But it's something to think about. So that dynamic is not straightforward. Generally, I thought they did a great job, but just be careful. You sometimes can feel embarrassed to ask if you know the secret, once you realise sometimes the secret of a trick, you may think, oh, that's not for me. I'm not going to end up doing that. So you need dealers to be sort of fully open with you. Some are. I think some hold something back though. And particularly there was one performer I was looking at who had what looked like a routine. I never worked out what it was. I wanted to buy it. I just couldn't. I asked him twice, just could not work out what it was. And my thought there is that he may have felt that it was the way the material was presented that he was selling, maybe some text. I'm not going to use somebody else's text word for word. I'm going to say it in my own words. So maybe if there had been a full dem of it, it wasn't really the trick at the end. It was the presentation that was selling. So that's very difficult to buy if you can't see a demo and you're there waiting to see a demo, asking the person who invented it to demonstrate it for you, and you're getting a sort of shrug. So different tricks may have different things. If it's a piece of hardware, it's a bit easier to say, because if you can, often the secrets are so elegant and that you just want to have them in your possession. So dealers, anyway, they did a great job. Anybody who's demonstrating Friday, Saturday, Sunday from dawn till nearly dusk, tirelessly, and still having the energy to do it, it's a real example. You get to see lots of people, engage with that dynamic. Could you do it? I'm not sure I could. So there it is. So they've got to be on the good signs. They're showing and they're telling all day long and keeping their enthusiasm, and that comes from a passion and a love from it, I think, partly, as well as the cash. Second up, I wasn't going to put names in these things, but I found in compiling my list, it's going to come down to some extent to names. And so the second in my list of good things in Blackpool this year is Andy Nyman. Now, I'm a bit of a fan anyway. The reason I'm growing this is because I've got a minor role in Fiddler on the Roof, and he's did hundreds of performances in it. But he also did a fantastic talk, just as you'd expect from him, without notes, and a really interesting subject matter with the sort of twist in the tale, as you'd expect from a co-writer of Darren Brown's shows. Not demonstrating magic tricks. In fact, he was intended to, but I don't think he had time. But just a very engaging, nice talk. And I could watch those all weekend long. And they were, I think, probably some of the best bits of the convention. I would have liked to have a few more of them. And he was in the Opera House for that. So just one off, not two performances of that. And but it was comfortable and brilliant, and very enjoyable sort of lessons. And the lesson was how you turn mistakes into positive things for life. Actually, in this case, positive things for magic, but it's a very strong metaphor more for life. That didn't need to be given to a room full of magicians. It could have been given to anybody. He had a great example, and it's a universal truth, isn't it, that turning mistakes into something, but the way he does it is always brilliant. Brings me to point number 5, universal truths. Those creativity lessons that we have. There was somebody, an American magician, who was giving marketing lessons, who I thought was very interesting. Always very interesting to hear that hardcore American hard sell that they do. Always worth hearing. There's always something you can take from that, even if not everything suits your style. Creativity lessons. There were some really great things. A couple of guys I mentioned later on, just of how you work with ideas, how you develop them. Things you'll know, things that you'll know some of it. You'll be able to take something from some of it, but always engaging. You know that's what they're doing. They're sharing real stuff with you, and it's lovely to always to hear brilliant people who've come up with amazing things, who still have a love for it, and share some of those creativity ideas. You may have heard them before, but they give you a new twist and base it in their own reality. So it's always a great thing to hear. I can't get enough of that sort of stuff, really. And then on similar grounds, the behind the scenes tips that some of the talks give you. There was a talk from the magician's assistant. I think she goes by, because she's been a magician's assistant. For example, behind the scenes tips. If you're going to use an assistant or employ an assistant, why not employ 2? Have an understudy in case your assistant lets you down. And I thought, I've often wondered how the show goes on if you don't have that understudy. If your show relies on somebody not phoning in sick the night of your show, having an understudy seems like a really good idea. But how many people do that or think of it? So little tips like that, tips from the real world are great. So I always enjoy those sort of things. Now, next point in good things about Blackpool is the folk of Blackpool. Just going, I mean, I'm a biased northerner, of course, north of England, but every encounter I had with people from Blackpool in various fish and chip shops that I frequented, and just even security, was just smiling, normal, engaging in normal ways, just reminding you you're not in London. So I really enjoyed that, and it's just, I think it's the north of England, and I'm biased, but there we go. You can claim it's something else, but it's a nice thing to have when you're away from home, which is what you are for a weekend. And last year, arriving in Blackpool, I was 45 degrees leaning into the wind, trying to stop my suitcase take off like a kite. But so there we are. Northern folk are best. Next one, I've put the unsung. Why have I put that? How can you praise the unsung? And the only reason I really put that is the sung, right? The famous people. I just thought some of them were phoning it in. Therefore, the unsung must be the people you look out for. And even in my hotel, when I asked to stay the third night on the hotel, I knew that was 80 quid on booking.com. And I said, what would it cost to stay the third night? The trains are down. And I had a little chat with him. He was 40 quid. 40 quid. I'd already paid 70 for the other night. So just people not ripping you off. The unsung people. I left a decent tip for the first time in a while as I left. Just because one good turn deserves another. So unsung people everywhere. This is your time. The sung people, sometimes they're phoning it in. Pick them up on it. Couple of names for you. Back to the creativity thing. Gaten Blue and Raphael. They were sort of more seasoned performers. I went to a creativity lecture with them and saw bits of performance from them on stage. And it's just great. Just like a warm bath, creative ideas. You feel like you're in a jamming session just listening to them. So these sort of seasoned performers, I really, really enjoyed listening to them. So that's why I like the lectures and the talks where they're available. And on the same lines, actually, just when I was picking things, honesty. I like an honest review of something. And some of the talks, was it Jamie Allen? I didn't actually know him, but he gave us a very honest talk. It was slightly short, 10 minutes short, he underran, but it was about his experiences going from being a cruise ship magician to booking, organising the Vegas show, or was it a Chicago show, the Imaginarium or something like that? The Illusionarium, I think it was called. But honest questions, people who, when they tell you, they'll give you an honest answer and they'll answer anything. I like that. I always like that. And Romany as well did the same thing. You just get you feel as though you're going to get honest answers and there's no BS. I always appreciate that. There's another name here. Gonzalo Gil. Now, on my list of not so good things, I'm going to go. Shall I go to that now? Yeah, I've said it, so I've got to now. On my list of not so good things is The One. The One was a competition, Magic's biggest cash prize. So what? Who cares if someone's going to get $30,000 or $40,000? They may do. It wasn't you or I. These were all well-established acts. Other competition winners had been brought in for a gala show. Why bother with a prize and call it The One? What's the point of that? It wasn't delivered on the night. It was, and these are all established. I've seen their acts before on TV, some of them. So I didn't even understand the point of that. But out of it was, it was a decent enough review show. I'll review it a bit later on. But one of my favourite act in it was, I may have spelled his name wrongly here, Gonzalo Gil. And he wove a brilliant story into his magic, and you could feel it. It didn't just look great. you felt as though you're dealing with an emotional story. It was the most, I thought it should have won outright, but he was up against such brilliant card manipulators from places the likes of Korea, who are perfect. We're in a golden age of this unbelievable card manipulation. It's like watching a ballet. These flourishes, cards appearing from everywhere. Everywhere's loaded with something, and the amazing stuff. It's just if you keep watching it, it can leave you a bit numb. How brilliant stuff can you watch? Don't you want to watch something that engages you emotionally? Maybe has some words in it even. Although admittedly, I don't think Gonzalaga's story did, but it had a much easier story to follow. So it was just beautifully done, and man, you could see his own emotions at the story he was playing out at the table, as opposed to these beautiful balletic presentations of card flourishes. And that's a problem when I'm sure these guys have practiced for 20 years to do brilliant stuff. And forgive me if it wasn't for Korea, but I think it was a Korean card manipulator won the One magic competition, and then performed the act the following night. And on the same bill, at the same show, was a chap from, I think, his part of the world, dressed almost identically, doing another act of mine. You'd have been hard pushed to tell the difference between the two. They're both exceptionally brilliant. We may never see card manipulators like that again, and it's an extraordinary thing, but how much extraordinary can you take? Sometimes you just want someone to talk to you and weave a little story that's a bit more connected with reality. So when you're watching this thing repeatedly, and on the first night, I just felt we just wanted watching these things over and over again. So there's a problem with balance. So when you're putting a show together, think about the balance. I mean, they're not going to appreciate my advice. Someone was watching this, they're going, "Oh, we did. Don't you think we did? What do you know?" Something went wrong. Now, minor things. I mean, that in a way is an embarrassment of riches. They're very good. It's just there's no problem with the quality there. Now, I'm going to go to bad things. I'm going to come back to my final good thing, because there was a train crash in Blackpool this year. Not a real train, mercifully, but a train crash called Mike Hammer. I'd never heard of him. And this was just awful. Now, second on my list of bad things, I'm going to tell you, is hosts. And unfortunately, the hosts that were culpable were American. And it was like the concept of hosting a show didn't exist for Americans. That can't be true. But they came on, and it was all, "Oh, is the light ready? I'm supposed to, when the light goes on, the next act's on." They're all looking back for this thing. "Is the light on? Is the light on?" I'm thinking, where's your material? Where's your jokes? We've got, I don't know how many people in that theatre, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. Why aren't you doing your material now, not asking me if the light's on? So the first act was a big name of magic, probably supposedly one of the biggest there, Kevin James. Now, he did something from his act, which was fine, with a young girl, produced a rose, very nice, and then struggled, didn't have anything. Had to fill for 30 seconds, didn't have anything. I thought, this is strange. How is this possible? And but the following day was that Mike Hammer. So he's an American magician. He has a minor Vegas venue, and he's ultra confident, and unfortunately lacks anything in the way of likability. He considered himself a comedy magician. I didn't go and see his show, but I saw him host a show for 2 hours, and I saw his hour lecture the following day. And I wouldn't be interested in going and seeing his show after this. So he thinks all his controversiality came back to his behaviour. I better tell you what happened. That he did only audience interaction. So I'm just going to move this slide, and I don't want to see that thumbs down anymore. It's annoying. His audience interaction, and his audience reaction was just this crowd work. I'm thinking, God, it's 2023. Are we still doing this? Hi, where are you from? I'm thinking, I don't care where this guy's from. I don't care. Hi, what's your name? I don't care what his name is. And he thinks this is cutting edge, state of the art, interesting entertainment for a room full of magicians who've come to see a gala show. The trouble is, he doesn't have any likability or charm. The volume was sky high. You can argue that's a technical problem. Either that or he's got no microphone technique. I don't know which it is. Either way, it was ear-splittingly weak. And I even wrote down some of the things he says. I'm glad I did now. It's a few days later. Guy on the front row. I'll change his name. Everyone look at Tim. Look at Tim, everybody. Stand up, Tim. He's creepy. Look how creepy he is. This is a guy in the VIP section, because you pay a couple of quid more so you get the best seats. He's creepy. He wasn't creepy. He seemed like a nice fella. He used the word creepy twice about people other than himself. Now, he was pretty creepy, Mike Hammer. Very just in-your-face aggression, but without the comedy. Thinking he's funny. And must have had enough endorsements, and if you do that, if you have a big enough audience, you can claim that the laughter is responding to you favourably, or that they're my audience. But your job as a host has to be much more inclusive than that. And it's all you've got to be. I like the idea that Blackpool still tries to do something that's edgy, but this guy doesn't have it. And I've been to see edgy. I seek out edgy stuff. I saw Jerry Sadowitz this year before he was cancelled in Edinburgh. He had 2 shows. I saw the first one, and that was a national outcry. But he had material. He had 90 minutes of jokes. You may not have liked them, but he had them. He brought them and he delivered them, and he knew what you were going to get. That also happens to do magic. He'd actually be quite a good host. I don't think they'd dare hire him. But they dare hire Mike Hammer, who doesn't have any jokes and doesn't have any likability. He was edgy in that he, apart from abusing this poor guy, and he never let up. He just kept coming back to him, calling him this creepy guy. Such a horrible bully. Inexcusable. Absolutely inexcusable. And then he goes, his big thing, stunt, was to go and grab one of the guys in a wheelchair, and he wheeled him towards the front of the stage. The guy looked in good humour and took it as well as he could. He wasn't in a position to argue with it, and put him in front. And if he'd been nice to him at some point rather than just mean, it would have looked a lot better. Most people know that you can't put a wheelchair anywhere in a theatre. He didn't know that, seemingly. So he blocked him somewhere. Everybody who'd been in the theatre before knew that wouldn't be acceptable. He left him there. Then he pushed him round the theatre. This guy's trying to take a bit. People are laughing. Not everybody. People around me are looking pretty glum. Some are looking pretty shocked. And it wasn't funny. And then eventually the poor old assistants have to come out and move the guy in the wheelchair back to where he was, the wheelchair designated area in the theatre. And he complains about that and moves him back, and then gives one of the assistants in the theatre a hard time. But there's just no fun to it. I came across, let me see if I can find this. I wish I'd put it on the thing. A quote from Groucho Marx the other day. It's in a book. So here we are. An amateur thinks it's funny if you dress up a man as an old lady, put him in a wheelchair, and give the wheelchair a push. Should I do it in Groucho Marx? An amateur thinks it's funny if you dress a man up as an old lady, put him in a wheelchair, and give the wheelchair a push that sends it spinning down a slope towards a stone wall. For a pro, it's got to be a real old lady. So you can talk about this stuff, you can do this stuff. He's not Groucho Marx. And I'll give you an example of when it can work. There was a very edgy comedian who should have been on my best list, actually. I'm going to put him on now. Clinton Baptiste. He's a performer I know, particularly from his other character, Barry from Watford. He did the same thing. Wayne Dobson, who has a very severe neurological condition, he's in a big wheelchair with lots of equipment on it. And he took the mickey out of him, but it was entertainer to entertainer, not entertainer to part of the audience, and it was edgy, Wayne's laughing. He's kind of got to. Plus, I remember Wayne. He used to do this to people, so it's okay to. You should be able to take it if you can give it out. And he also implied later on, when he'd done it quite a lot, that he was told he had permission to it, so he checked. So, but also he's a brilliant performer. I forget the actor's name behind Clinton Baptiste, but he's a brilliant performer. He has edgy stuff, and he's got jokes. He's brought material with him. So it's great that they had that edginess there. The same material in Hands Like Mike Hammer is a train crash. No material, terrible crowd work, awful name calling and bullying. And also, where's the light? Is the light on? Is the light on? These American hosts. So didn't bring any material with him. I don't think he went to rehearsal. And then I went to watch the lecture the following day. And all the questions were, what do you do when you push it too far? To which he said, the only amusing or interesting thing he said all day, he says, I do a lecture the following day to explain it. So I thought that was quite funny. The trouble is, in that lecture was zero humility. He'd learned nothing. It was all okay. Not only that, by the way, if you're offended, you're not offended for yourself, you're offended for other people. That's his excuse to himself in his own head. I've seen those excuses in Twitter and social media. That's the one he labels so he can continue with this sort of rubbish. So yeah, and the word creepy he never used about himself extraordinarily. He knows he could insult Mexicans because that's where he come from, and he knows that Spanish women can take it. The generalizations that he came up with, not being bothered that this sort of stuff could really be very memorable and hurtful to people when it didn't have any quality or humor with it. It was just the weakest I've seen. I've seen lots of people do crowd work, and I'm beginning to wish they'd just all stop. He should never start. And to turn up, not to rehearse your role as a host properly enough. Paul Zenon was in the room, right? Not in the room necessarily, but he was at the convention. He knows how to do it. I'll tell you how to host. You go, you do some jokes, you get people to like you a bit. You make sure you get the a nice round of applause on and off for the acts and know who they are, maybe even a sentence about them before you bring them on, and then in between time, and if the lights go down, if there's any, you do a bit of your act, you bring a trick with you. Paul Zenon was doing his beard lass on the wooden circle. He'd entertain us, he'd do a stunt, he'd have some jokes, but he's bang on reliable. He can do that sort of thing. He's a brilliant host, but put him on, for goodness sake. He was in the room, just take that idiot off and put a pause. Have I said enough about it? I've said enough. Bored with him. So that was the Mike Hammer train crash and his excuse for it. He reckons there were boos on there. I didn't actually hear boos particularly, but they booed him off after his lecture, but I think that might have been ironic. But he deserved it either way. He'll have learnt nothing. So hosts, so the hosts essentially are back thing. Now I'm going to go back to a good thing, because there's one thing I want to say. The hosts for the gala show, Kevin James, Mike Hammer, as I say, they were both under par. And I did stay the Sunday night, and the third night was a guy called Max Fulham, and he was brilliant. A young guy, British guy, showing the Americans how it should be done. It is a British thing, why not? We were underrepresented there, I think, the British. The creativity in the dealers' hall and the products, I think there was a lot of possibly good British stuff there. But he nailed that hosting. He did it exactly how it should have been done. He should have been doing all three nights for me. He did some of his acts, his ventriloquist. He was hilarious. All three acts were pointing out the stagehands who were picking up cards that had fallen from the previous act, but he could do it as a ventriloquist. It was hilarious. His talent, his skill, he presented himself brilliantly. It was funny, very interesting. He did most of his acting that he kind of hosted, and he was one of the acts pretty much as well, but it was sort of seamless. But he needn't have been. He has got a brilliant future. Young guy, brilliant future ahead of him. So skilled. Everything was great. All his ventriloquism, all his comedy is in jokes with the audience that had been written that weekend. The other guys hadn't bothered writing anything that was special for that weekend or special for the course of magicians. Max Fulham, absolutely brilliant. just showed you how to do hosting. And that was the lesson I really should have put here as well, just as his name. The young teaching the older guys how to do it. That was what came off. Max Fulham teaching, schooling the likes of Mike Hammer and Kevin James. That's what I saw. Brilliant. So let's go to something a bit more minor. The maps, directions and instructions. It's all very well, isn't it, when you turn up for a thing and you're supposed to know where you go. You know where this hall is, you know where that hall is. I couldn't find the map for the first 3 days in the programme, and then I found it's tiny with even tinier writing. There's not really much help to let you go where to go. You get a ticket that says early or late with it, but you're not really sure what that applies to. The map, the directions and instructions are it's all a bit phoned in. Even finding out who's on before February is almost impossible. You've got to take a leap of faith, a year in advance if you're going to. So, the organisation is sort of a bit thin on the ground, really, a little bit. And there we go. Could do a lot better with that. Just get the basics right. Not assume that everybody. Just do it as though you're presenting someone where people haven't been there before, right? Just do it that way. Welcome everybody. I've mentioned the one before. There was no need for a big cash. This is the problem with the BGT, the Britain's Got Talent, America's Got Talent version. So, we need a big cash prize. Nobody cares about it, and they weren't. That wasn't a cash prize you and I could earn. It was all for previous competition winners. And this is probably the main difficulty. It's a difficulty for them, I understand. Is these are acts that you've seen on TV. One of the acts, Mario Lopez, I'd seen all his acts the previous year in Blackpool. It was a repeat. If I was watching that on TV, I'd call that a repeat. I know it takes a long time to put these acts together, but I'd seen it. And I've seen it on TV, and I've seen various other things. I don't need to keep seeing the same stuff. I want something, I want a little spin on it. It used to be that if you released your jokes on a DVD, you could no longer do them on a stage, for example. I know that's difficult if you practice 20 years to do card manipulation, but you've got to find another spin on it, another story. I know you can do that act for the rest of your life. Probably there's enough cruise ships now to do that again. Now the music halls, the variety halls are afloat, but it's not good for a Blackpool audience. We're looking for the next cutting edge stuff. I think we are anyway, not just rehashes of stuff. Kevin James' old illusions from 10 years, 20 years ago, maybe even longer. The snow, I can see the snow cannons coming out of the roof. That's not an illusion to me. It might look great on TV, and it was nice and fun, but how many times? So that it ties in my element, recycling and repeats. But to watch the identical act that had been on February 2022 in Blackpool, Mario Lopez's brilliant salt cellar routine, which is endless salt coming out from everywhere all the time. But I thought, I saw this here last year. Am I going to see it next year again? What's going on? And I put down their card manipulators as well. That's so cruel because I think it is brilliant and it is exceptional. They deserve all the plaudits and credit they get. It's just, you can get a bit numb by it. I feel guilty for saying it, but what can I say? So the card manipulator one of a one, not the guy with a smaller, more homely, more emotional, original thing, which I thought was a shame, but there we go. I can understand it because they are brilliant. So, questions. This is a bit of a thin one, but if you're going to ask a question at a Q&A, don't do, and what is your favourite something? And what is your favourite this? Ask a question you really want to know the answer to, or don't ask. Seems very unfair, doesn't it? But there we go. So that's it. Except I've got a few ideas for you. So a few ideas from the creativity section. I think it was Gaten Bloom who says, bring your ideas to you. Bring them to you. So bring these ideas to you. So you get an idea, then you can go and visit it. How do I make that mine? I just really like the phrase, bring them to you. Internalize something, isn't it? Make it yours. So both of those are less good than the phrase, bring them to you. So bring them to you. Bring it to you. Just a nice phrase, I thought. Other advice he was given about tricks, forget you know how they work. And then you can get new thinking. So forget you know how a trick works. And then, well, make of that what you will. And from Kevin James, who repeated a couple of times, have a deadline. Set yourself a deadline for something. And that each time I heard that, I thought, yeah, that's powerful. This is why I'm doing these daily YouTube videos. I've set myself the commitment to do it, which is why some of them have been ropey, including this one, you're thinking. But I set myself that deadline and made that commitment to do it, to do 365 this year. So, yeah, have a deadline. And then the other thing they had was don't stop thinking too early, which you've come up with this will work for any sort of creativity. Just keep thinking, what if next? What if I did another thing? I've always often thought that once brilliant performers write a hit album, they're obviously in the zone. I always think Dire Straits, Brothers in Arms, whole album of brilliant songs. Next album, a bit rubbish. Why, when they were in the mood, didn't they just write another album at the same time and release it 2 years later? They were in the zone, weren't they? Don't stop thinking too early. There'll be another wrinkle on a trick that you haven't thought of that makes it a little better. Don't wait for it to be discovered. You might be able to just think that out now. There was, I think I'm right, I watching the movie Sleuth with Michael Caine. It's a brilliant twisty-turny thriller. And then it was remade with Michael Caine, original with Michael Caine and Laurence Olivier, and then remade with Michael Caine in the older man's role and Jude Law. And it has this twist in it that you kind of expect, and then it has an entire third act that you didn't expect, also with twists in it. So it's not just a remake, it's a remake plus. It's not as good as the original, but at least you get extra value, you get this extra way that story could have gone, and it's why it's perfectly valid to make Rocky 7, Rocky 8, because those guys would have had stories if they'd lived that long. And so it doesn't need to be just following men in their prime. You can tell a good story about a man at any age. In fact, it's possibly easier to tell a story with, about a man who's lived so much life and loss and highs and lows than it is somebody in the prime of his life punching the living daylights out of Clubber Lang or whatever it is. So that's why sequels can always work. If they don't work, it's not because they shouldn't have been made. It's because they should have been made better or written better, usually. So don't stop thinking too early. Do things your way. They're my thoughts anyway. So I don't like to say too many negative things, but they're my thoughts as somebody who goes to some conventions. I enjoyed Blackpool. I appreciate them putting it on. I expect to be there next year. But I also appreciate the honesty of people who've sometimes called things out. So I'm just calling a couple of things out. But appreciating the rest. Also, I haven't mentioned, but it's nice to bump into familiar faces and friends there. As I go, I gather a few more of those and become a little bit more confident to approach people and talk to people. Whereas that can be very difficult, I think. It's not obvious that how you'll be received and if you've got anything to offer, really, if you're not a performer or you're not all that. So, but I think it's a lovely bunch of people, and people are very nice, and it's a great community. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate you for listening this far. If you have, please do consider liking and subscribing, and commenting. I'll answer on the comments. I hope I haven't offended anybody too much, apart from Mike Hammer, which I don't really care about too much. And I'll see you tomorrow.